Greetings, fellow video game fans. My name is... no, that's not right. That's not how I do it. Damn it. Greetings, fellow video game fans, and welcome back to Unrepentant Geeking Presents Thumb Wars, a video game discussion show where we begin the debate and you continue it. As always, I am your host, Shaun, and I am joined for this return to Thumb Wars, because, God, it's been a while. I am joined this week by longtime frequent friend of Unrepentant Geeking. Introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Petros Ioannou. I'm the writer and creator of the digital series My Life as a Video Game.
Woo! And there's something else you are as well, Petros.
I'm Batman.
Something darker, much more secret that you've kept close to your chest for a long. And that, what you are, Petros, is a Final Fantasy VII fanatic!
Oh, that's not that bad.
Admit it! Admit it!
I've always admitted it.
What?
I've always admitted it.
No, you've kept it as a long, dark secret. No. You only ever told me, and that was only as we stood over that dead body, and I shouldn't really say any more about that. Anyways, no, seriously though, yes, Petros is a big, huge, well, he and I are both Final Fantasy fans in general. We're both very fond of the series. But in particular, his favorite has always been Final Fantasy VII, as, you know, one of these days we need to go back and finish that retrospective we were recording.
Yeah.
We have hours of recorded audio talking about the first 6 games, and then we got delayed by a bunch of things, and then we started recording 7, and then they announced the remake. And so we were kind of like, crap. And I was kind of like, I'm not even sure, because we talked about 7 some throughout, so I'm kind of like, do we re-record everything? I mean, you know.
It's anyways, so it was kind of funny, because when we recorded so much about what I would like to see, what a potential remake might be like, and now one's actually happening.
Right, so it kind of put a kibosh on the whole thing, and we've kind of just been stuck on that. But okay, so yes, they did announce a while back, I think it was at E3, last year, wasn't it? The Final Fantasy VII Remake, or was it at PlayStation Experience? No, that was where they teased. That was where they announced. Anyways, doesn't matter. They announced the Final Fantasy VII Remake, an HD remake, titled Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I would complain about how pointless that title is, but this is Square Enix. For them, that is an amazing show of restraint. The fact that they're not calling it Final Fantasy VII Remake of the Chuper Raka 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 Fokoa is a miracle. Oh, 3.81.
Yes, with crystals up your butt.
I love you, Square Enix. I love you, but your titles, just fuck you. Fuck you and your titles.
Specifically those ones relating to like the Kingdom Hearts series have just gone ridiculous.
I get what you guys are going for. I get it. Technically, what you're doing.
You do.
The idea, okay. The 2.8 whatever. It's going to collect the most recent 3DS game, which is basically Kingdom Hearts 3 is like a direct prequel to Kingdom Hearts 3. Okay, while also being its own game. And they're also going to include this. There was this whole. They're going to include like some new stuff, which is going to be set between the games. So that's why they're calling it 2.8. But it's really dumb. And it doesn't, you see, you don't use a naming convention like that if you thought it would make things less confusing. And it won't. But all right, that's another discussion for another day. We're here to talk about Final Fantasy VII, specifically at, what is it called? The big PlayStation event last weekend.
PSX, PlayStation Experience.
I still don't see why we brought a Shinra soldier along. No way he'd throw all that away for us. What's his name, anyway?
Cloud Strife. And he says it's former soldier. Look, heavy security like this, you want a professional.
We're paying you more than a few gil. You best be worth it.
Look, I don't care about your politics.
this for the planet, same as us.
Not interested.
When? Get back here! Okay, Recruit. Let's move.
Yeah, there we go. Whatever. It's all blending together. Look, I'm still recovering from Black Friday and Cyber Monday and all the woes that come with the fact that we are a hideous, horrible consumer society that I hate. No, I love my country, but it's the people in it. It's kind of like, I love driving, if not for all the other idiots on the road. I love America, if not for all the other idiots who support Donald Trump out there. Yeah, I went there. Deal with it. But yes, there's going to be a lot more. I'm going to be pissing people off by the end of this. Woo! Bring it on. Bring on your hate. It only makes me stronger. It feeds me. Anyways.
Yeah.
They released the surprisingly...
Sean, can I put you on pause for just 1 second? What's up?
Yeah.
What's up here?
I'm gonna walk to City Gates.
Okay.
I should be, like an hour.
All right.
Text me when you're done. And
All right. Okay. Okay. All right.
But let me in. I'm leaving the front door alone.
All right. Okay. Cool. All right. Cool. All right. Let's go, Sean. Sorry.
Basically, lost my train of thought. Oh yes, they revealed a surprise move, because I honestly did not think they'd be releasing something like this soon. They released a new trailer, Square Enix, for Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it wasn't just CGI, they actually showed gameplay footage, and then took it a step further by actually having English voice acting. Which, okay, that last thing is pretty unusual. Like, they don't even have necessarily always... As somebody who's watched a lot of Square Enix trailers over the years they've released, for North American consumption, they've released many, for instance, Kingdom Hearts trailers where it's so early, it was still early enough in the process, they don't have English voice acting, so they just do subtitles. So it's not like they're unwilling to do that.
I'm pretty sure until very recently, like until about maybe 6 months to a year ago, they were still releasing Final Fantasy XV trailers with Japanese voice acting.
Right. So the fact, it's possible. It's possible they recorded dialogue specifically for this trailer, and we'll get into this some, but it's still noteworthy, it's a bit different, and it's interesting, and it raises all sorts of questions. And then we got a bunch more information. Well, we got some more. We got actual information, let's put it that way. I wouldn't say a bunch. We got actual details, at least somewhat, about 7, both from this trailer and from announcements made afterwards, and then the internet lost its goddamn fucking mind. Even by the standards of the internet, I was just like, I was standing back and watching this, and I was just kind of going, seriously, people, what the fuck is wrong with all of you? Because, okay, the big news, I think the biggest news to come out of it, there was confirmation, yes, from the trailer that we are getting some sort of what looks like a variation on we're not getting the old active time battle system. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, a lot of people are saying now it's just going to be a straight-out action game, maybe more in the vein of Kingdom Hearts, and that's possible. Some people are saying maybe it's going to be more like Crisis Core, which was kind of halfway. That's possible. The truth is, we don't really know what we saw, and they're not giving details on that. We know we're going to get a system that's at least somewhat different. That's what we can say. Which, frankly, if you weren't expecting that, you're not very bright. I don't want to, or you're living in denial, because what on earth? Do you not... There's a lot of people that don't seem to realize two very important things here. That A, making a actual full-on remake, not just a let's enhance the graphics a little bit, although even that would be very difficult to do. That's a lot harder than people seem to realize. I don't just mean making it, clearing up so it can look decent on HD and you can actually read the text. I mean, actually upscaling the graphics would be difficult enough, but doing an actual full-on remake for something like Final Fantasy VII will not be effing cheap. And second of all, Square Enix is not Ubisoft. Square Enix is not EA. Square Enix is sure as hell not Activision. Yeah, they've bought up companies and they've made like a Tomb Raider, and this is the company that said they lost money on Tomb Raider, despite Tomb Raider, that the Tomb Raider reboot selling more by a significant margin than any other previous Tomb Raider game. By a huge margin. And yet they still lost money on that, because the reality is that AAA game making is an incredibly expensive prospect these days. And especially for a Final Fantasy game from a company that's as... Because look, whatever else you think of Square Enix, okay? You hate Final Fantasy 13, 14, 12, whatever. Fine. That's your opinion. I absolutely respect it. But you cannot tell me, okay? Whatever you think of Final Fantasy 13, you cannot tell me it is an ugly-looking game. You cannot tell me it does not have impressive production values. You may think the story is crap. You may think the game plays for shit. Fine. That's subjective. You may or may not like the art style personally, although really it's not all that out of pace with what you get from Final Fantasy for quite some time now, starting with FF7. But fine. That's subjective. But if you take the game's graphics and you compare it to other titles that came out at the same time, and even titles that are coming out now, you cannot say, well, this game looks like they didn't make any effort on it visually and it looks like crap. Agreed?
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. Like I think it's even more relevant when it comes to talking about the FF7 remake, because you can't just like throw money at something and expect it to come out like.
Well, you can if you're Ubisoft and you have access to 20 different studios, you can force out an Assassin's Creed every year, more or less. Intact,
but exactly, that's the point. Is that it's almost with Assassin's Creed, it seems like almost every other year they get a decent one. Like Assassin's Creed 3 sucked, and then Assassin's Creed 4 was pretty good. Assassin's Creed Unity sucked, and then Syndicate was pretty good.
More importantly, they have a lot more resources.
Yeah.
Than Square Enix. That's the thing. Square Enix is not Square Enix is not... Their impact on the video game industry is huge, okay? They've had a huge impact over the years, as much impact, I think, as anybody short of maybe a Nintendo or an Atari, okay? They've had a massive impact on the overall video game industry, and to some degree or another, that continues, though lesser, I think, these days.
When you look at Square Enix, people look at them as like this massive juggernaut of a company, but they're really not. I mean, when you think about it, Enix themselves were not a big company. They had the Dragon Warrior / Dragon Quest series for a number of years, which was very popular in Japan, less popular in the West. Final Fantasy, which was popular on both sides, was Squaresoft, but that was it. Squaresoft were developers; they weren't necessarily publishers at the time. I believe Nintendo published the first 6 Final Fantasy games, and then Sony published FF7.
Yeah, and it's also worth remembering that, in the SNES and NES days, you could get away with having a small team of people making a massive game.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. Not just the graphics, but also because players were less demanding. You could get away with a lot. You go back and Final Fantasy VI, one of my all-time favorite games, yada yada, but there's a lot of filler in that game if we're talking about just walking, Final Fantasy IV, there's lots of filler in those games, and by filler I mean random encounters.
Yeah.
There's or pointless dungeons that are just kind of there to fill out time.
Yeah, I mean, FF7 as a game was one of the first games that Squaresoft made that really sort of made them do mass hirings and stuff like that, and like
and you talk about a game with a lot of filler.
Well, yeah, it does have a lot of filler, but at the same time, FF7 also has I think FF7 has a certain structure to it that doesn't lend itself to being remade easily either.
Well, yeah, because I think more so than any other Final Fantasy game. Okay, I think Final Fantasy VII is a game of its time, because Final Fantasy VII is the game that came out in that awkward period when people were switching away from, because the changeover from 16-bit to the next generation after that, I think, is the most awkward period of changeover.
Yeah.
You look back at a lot of games from that period, and they have aged horribly. It's why I'm not bothered necessarily, I mean, in terms at least visually, and I know games aren't just about visuals, but there's a difference between saying, well, this game looks good for a retro title because it has and then there's, I'd say, well, this game really tried and had good art style, but it can't overcome the flaws because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing with 3D graphics.
Well, I mean, like, okay, so I remember, okay, so something someone always says to me whenever I say that Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game ever is that people say to me that, oh yeah, you just really liked it for the graphics at the time. I was like, no, actually, I played it in like 1998, like halfway through 98, about a year and a half after it came out for the first time, and I thought the graphics were shit.
Oh, yeah.
At the time, I really did not think the graphics were all that. I thought the cutscenes were pretty nice and pretty awesome. And then about a year later, we got FF8, and it got a nice combination of the two. But the thing is, within a year and a half, FF7's graphics were outdated. So to me, it was never really the graphics that made the game.
And it's more than just that they're outdated; it's that there's a real conflict of styles in them.
Oh yeah,
the switch over from the overworld and the super deformed to the more realistic of the cutscenes and the fight engine is awkward as hell. And anytime you see the super deformed, they're trying to use those super deformed, which are kind of like the old 16-bit, but halfway into 3D. When they try to use them for storytelling purposes, no fingers. It all feels FF7. I don't hate FF7, I want to be clear. It's not my favorite game, but I don't hate it. I don't think it's bad, okay? I want to be very clear on that. But I do think it's awkward in a way that was unique to it from any other games in the series.
Yeah. There was a lot of games around about that time that were, like, not only struggling to get to grips graphically with the way, with the transition from 16-bit to 32-bit, but also struggling to get to grips with gameplay-wise. If you look at FF7, the gameplay in that game, aside from the occasional thing here and there, primarily it is a 16-bit style game in terms of the gameplay. Yeah. There is there's nothing like in the like FF8 did, like with the boost and the summoning and like a lot of the mini games stuff like that. Like there's nothing in FF7's gameplay that is distinctly advanced. The graphics looks advanced, but again, the clashing art styles, that was actually something they did a lot more with the 16-bit characters as well. If you look back then, but then when you transition into 3D, it's awkward.
Right. Nowadays, they've got a better handle on it, and they know how to do the super deformed look that can work in a 3D game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They do it quite well, but they didn't really know what they were doing. And it doesn't help that they were switching over for the first time to a non-Nintendo hardware. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things you look back. I wouldn't necessarily even say it was... I'd go a step further with the gameplay. To me, the gameplay of FF7 was always I'd call it meat and potatoes RPG. It's very bog standard. Even the materia system just feels like a variation of the magicite system from 6. It doesn't really feel like that's you've got the limit breaks, but the limit breaks are flash, no substance, for the most part. There's none of the kind of experimentation and gameplay that you saw not just in 8, but before it in 6, because 6 did all sorts of crazy things. 6, went really, because it was their last hurrah in the 16-bit, and they really went nuts with all sorts of crazy ideas, and not every idea worked, but man, did they go out there and try different things with the characters and try and make the combat different, and they did like timed battles, and they did all sorts of crazy stuff. 7, it's clear they were struggling so much to make this work, and also just the fact that in terms of scale, I always think of 6 as a bigger game.
Really?
Because looking back, but that's really because it gets more, but what I mean by that is, what I realized was I think it's bigger because I think it gets more epic than FF7. I'm sorry, but in FF6, the entire world actually gets destroyed, and that's only halfway through the game. The sense of scale is much bigger in 6 than I think in 7. That's partially by design. I think 7 is a more intimate story overall. I think 7's a lot more about this core characters.
Yeah, six is definitely an ensemble game and this is like where I always liked 7 was like 6 was always an ensemble game and 7 had a single protagonist. This was Cloud's story and like the others were the supporting cast rather than the cast.
Well, and 6 also went out of its way to deliberately upend and to play with the narrative conventions. You start out thinking Terra's going to be the lead character, then you lose her, then eventually you get Celsius of all... I mean, that's the point. And it was a very experimental game in a lot of ways, and a lot of things that you would see the inklings of ideas that would eventually come to define the series for good or for bad later on, whatever your personal opinion. A lot of them have their start in 6.
Yeah, and I think in many ways 7 was, for me at least, a refinement on 6's on a lot of 6's ideas. And I think that's where a lot of the 6 versus 7 thing comes around sometimes with people, is that like people with 6 is like 6 came first, and that's why I have the sort of nickname is FF6 is the hipster of the FF6 of the Final Fantasy games.
It's just that I think I actually, some people, when I tell people, oh, 7 isn't my favorite game, not even close, and the series goes, oh, you must be disappointed about the remake. That's not true. You see, here's the thing. I know there is a tendency, out there in nerdosphere, geekosphere, just in general, to automatically poo-poo and downgrade, look down upon anything that is a remake. And certainly there are times where that is, if you're trying to remake Brazil, for example, what the fuck are you doing? If you're trying to remake Casablanca, what the fuck are you doing? You're not going to be, because part of what made those things, first of all, those are already perfect examples of the story they're trying to tell. Those two examples are giving are perfected versions of their stories. There is nothing new that a remake can bring that can improve on it. And second of all, those things are such unique products of either a creative vision or a time. I mean, Casablanca is the perfect example of something that shouldn't be special, but largely is because everything came together just right. Okay? While Brazil is a perfect example of a unique artistic vision being brought to life. Okay? I wouldn't mind a remake of FF8, but I feel like FF8 already largely got it right. I wouldn't mind a remake of FF6, but I can still enjoy and go back and play the old 6 as long as it's not with those hideous iOS graphics. Really, what the... Anyways, I can enjoy 6. I don't need a remake, but I can't go back and play 7 anymore. There's so many sections in that game which, even at the time, annoyed the shit out of me. And the thought of going back now, and I thought I had problems with the story, with the execution. I like the characters a lot. I still love the world and the characters. Crisis Core is one of my all-time favorite games. I love the Advent Children movie. I don't necessarily think it's a great movie, but I love it. Okay, I enjoy it. I think it's a great little tribute to fans, and so on and so forth. And I would love to see more stories set in that world, but I think the actual game that launched that world is flawed from start literally to end, because you and I have talked in depth many times about my feelings about the Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and I know, like, the way you feel about FF7 is kind of the way I feel about FF8 in many ways. Like, I would personally love to see a remake of FF8 in the future, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
Right. So I actually am very excited at the thought of a remake of FF7, because I think there's a lot of potential in that story and in those characters and in that world, and now not hindered by an execution that can't always live up to it. So I'm actually very excited for the FF7 remake. And that's why I was so perplexed by the way people lost their mind, getting back around to that. Because the big announcement was that, yes, it looks like in some way or another, FF7 remake will be getting an episodic release. That's all we know, by the way. There are no real definition on what that means. And, first of all, I wouldn't think people would lose their mind just at the idea of episodic at all, since, what is this, 2005? Hi, Telltale Games says hello. They're doing so successful that other developers have been jumping on that bandwagon. So, why are we suddenly assuming that, episodic... And I understand the difference is that there's a difference in scale between, say, a Telltale adventure game, which altogether is going to be, 5 or 6 hours, and an epic RPG, but that's also kind of the... Also, this isn't Konami we're talking about. I understand that Square Enix has made games you don't like, but I challenge anyone to tell me that you're getting ripped off in terms of the amount of content in, say, Lightning Returns. You may not like the content, but there's a 40 to 50 hour game there, okay? I challenge you to play Tomb Raider and tell me you're not getting your money's worth in terms of content, even though that's not technically a Square Enix game. But I you know what I mean. They're at least producing it to some degree. Look at Square Enix's output in recent years. You can't tell me you're not getting, they're not Konami. They're not releasing Ground Zeroes. They haven't, yes, they've messed up in the past. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Square Enix hasn't made mistakes. They absolutely have, but so has any other company. I love Nintendo. I'm not going to pretend Nintendo hasn't done stupid things along the way.
Oh, absolutely. And look, if we want to look at people who have gotten pissed off and hated some Square Enix games over time, over the years, look no further than me. Like I really, really did not like FF13, for example. I was not much of a fan of 12 either, and I found, although I preferred 13.2 to 13 itself, I found just even after I really enjoyed the ending and everything, I found afterwards I was like, I'm just not interested in seeing the sequel to this. So I didn't even get Lightning Returns in the end. I was just like, why am I paying my money for this? But in the end, I like Square Enix for the last they had a bit of a regime shift a few years ago, and a few things seem to have moved around a little bit since then, and they seem to be a lot more focused on developing quality games and figuring out ways to make money. Because as you said before, AAA titles, they're expensive to make, and
Right.
here is a little dark secret I actually do have. For a while, I was a fan game developer. And a fan game developer using RPG Maker XP, and I developed a Final Fantasy fan game, which
you disgust me, sir. You disgust
actually got quite far along. I had about 30 hours of gameplay in that. Not all of it perfect. About 10 hours of it were ready for release before I spoke with a Square Enix lawyer. But the truth is, I was planning to release that episodically. Why? Because I wanted to get it out. Because getting out was actually more important to me. Getting out in a good condition rather than having to. Because here's the thing: look at FF15, which was once Versus 13. That has been in development for a decade now.
Look at Kingdom Hearts 3.
Exactly. Like we've literally seen gameplay of trailers of Final Fantasy 15 since 2006. Since the day the PlayStation 3 was launched.
Well, it was originally going to be a PlayStation 3 game.
Yeah. And
enough said.
And that just shows like I think Square Enix has learned their lesson a little bit with 7, and multiple times. And this was long before the remake was announced. They'd mentioned in previous articles, even the creator Sakaguchi had mentioned. Well, they cut a lot of content from 7 in general, and like a lot of stuff that got lost in translation and things like that. And
that's one other thing, by the way, is FF7 suffered from a hideous original translation.
Yeah, honestly, it took me a few years to really get some of the really cool stuff about the game, honestly. And even though I really enjoyed the game as a kid, I think that's because I was willing to accept some of its flaws as a kid more than I am now, and especially regarding some of the missing pieces of the puzzle, which I didn't really understand until later when I was older. And look, like I said, FF7 is my favorite game of all time, joint with Xenoblade Chronicles. And I think that releasing it episodically is a unique experiment with an RPG, because it's not really been done with an RPG before, at least not one like of
That's
this.
not fair. Well, not of this size.
Not
but
of this
Square
scale,
itself
yeah.
has remember Final Fantasy Dimensions.
Exactly.
Remember the Final Fantasy IV sequel.
Yeah, exactly.
And neither of which I want to emphasize. Neither of which were ripoffs. You paid extra. I think for the 4 sequel you ended up paying probably a total of $20 altogether, and you definitely got a lot more than $20 worth of game there. I mean, yes, it was mostly reusing old assets, but what did you want? It was a made-for-mobile sequel, meant to be a deliberate throwback sequel. I mean, that was the.
They originally was only released in Japan. They weren't planning to release it in the West originally. Since then, it's been wildly popular, so they have released it on multiple platforms. And that's like Square Enix, since their sort of like reorganization of their hierarchy and their structure, their management structure and whatnot, they seem to have gone through this thing where they're trying to figure out how to do things better. Like, if you look at so before the rearrangement, they had Final Fantasy All the Bravest, maybe the worst game I've ever played.
Certainly one of the biggest rip-offs I've ever played.
Exactly, yeah. Now compare that with their more recent Final Fantasy game for mobile phones, Record Keeper, which I believe Shaun and I have talked about before. At some point, whether it got released or not, I'm not sure. But Final Fantasy Record Keeper, I've probably paid more than $30 for that game, and I don't feel ripped off at all, because I've actually really enjoyed. It's been pay as you want kind of thing. Whereas this episodic feeling for FF7, I knew the second I saw this trailer for the first trailer for FF7 back at E3, I was like, oh god, we're not going to see this until like 2025, are we? Like that, and that was, and I had so many people around me going, oh yeah, it's going to be released in like 2017 probably, like it's going to take a couple of years, but it's going to come out. And I was like, no, you're not going to see this for 10 years. I know how this goes. Like, if this has just been announced, this is not going to come out for ages. But episodic allows them to circumvent that. It allows them to go and release things in bite-sized chunks where you'll pay $20 or $10 or $15 for it makes it more like okay. Here's an example. It's more like a TV series than a movie. It's like slow drip. You get season 1, and then season 2, and then season 3, and you get like a bigger story out of it, which each season has its own like unique feeling to it sometimes.
I do feel like there's a lot of assumptions being made here. Now, we don't, like I said, I admit, when I hear episodic gaming, I do initially think of Telltale games, but when you stop and think about it, it could just as easily be episodic in the same way that you could argue, technically, Final Fantasy XIII became an episodic series. It could be that you get once a year for 3 years a $40 to $50 release that's got 30 to 40 hours worth of gameplay that starts out and divides the game into chunks. And more so than some games, there was a definite episodic, there are distinct chapters that you could if you want.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, so obviously chapter 1, that's going to be Midgar. That's the whole section of Midgar. And if we the truth is, to get out of Midgar, okay, if I'm playing FF7 today, to get out of Midgar will take me 3 hours, probably 3-4 hours. When you're first playing the game, though, it takes most people 10 to 15 hours to get out of Midgar. And now expand that into it, you were about to say, but I'm kind of cutting you off here, so I apologize. But expanding out into a PS4 style game, which I can't even imagine. They've consistently said during this remake process, they really want to give this grand scale to Midgar and make the Midgar chapter of things, because Midgar is often a lot of people's favorite section of the game. Sometimes although it's not mine, I really enjoy the setting of it. I thought it was this beautiful and unique setting at the time, and it still to me is my favorite intro to an RPG. Really, is the opening section of Midgar is so great. It's just such a unique setting and everything. Let
me bring something up, which is Final Fantasy Lightning Returns. I know, but the thing is, Lightning Returns had 4 main areas, okay? 2 of which were basically 4 or 5. They had a number of distinct main areas, and they were distinct, and you would travel between them to do different quests and stories and things like that, okay? 2 of those areas were urban environments. Outright, these are just cities you're exploring, and you'd still find it, and they were massive, sprawling cities, and you'd think, how can you set whole subchecks of the game? Because there are sections of the city where monsters will appear, basically, or bad guys will appear, and it's not that, but neither of those cities were ever meant to be nearly as big as something like Midgar. I have no trouble at all picturing a version of Final Fantasy VII where you turn Midgar into this big, huge, open-world environment.
I mean, here's an example, actually, just quickly. The original plot of FF7 was not supposed to go outside of Midgar.
Yep.
It was a detective game, basically, set inside this giant city, because they didn't think they could do a whole world on the PlayStation at the time.
Right.
Proved them wrong, but,
I could see some people going, but do we really want a whole game in Midgar? Well, there are ways around that. You could, if you add in more content, for example, you could do flashback missions to Cloud, there's all sorts of things you could do. I'm not saying you can only stay in Midgar. You could maybe have missions be set, but yeah, Midgar's going to be the main location. And to those who say, why would we want a whole game in a city? Grand Theft Auto says hello.
Exactly.
I'm not the biggest Grand Theft Auto fan here, folks, but I mean, is it really that strange of a concept to set an entire game or a chapter of a game in a city?
When you're talking about Midgar as well,
there's all sorts of different environments in Midgar. It's not all. It doesn't. The original Midgar is a bit of a mess because, again, like you said, they had ambition, but they couldn't pair it all. But now you could really bring Midgar to life and give it all sorts of different areas. So you could have the rundown slums, but you could also have the upscale areas, and you could have parts where there's parts with parks and greenery, and there's the graveyards. Do
you remember how? This is one of my favorite things about FF7 was it's the way it got really descriptive about its world, and that's, I know one of your favorite things about FF7 and its universe is just that, its universe, its world. And I look at looking at FF7's Midgar and how exactly it the way they described the way it was built. It was several cities that eventually just merged into one. It's basically
like New York.
Yeah, like New York, like
London.
Or London, yeah, exactly. Or Los Angeles actually is like that as well.
Right.
Like you've got Santa Monica and Hollywood and Long Beach and Beverly Hills. They're all separate cities that were part of Los Angeles County and eventually became one big city.
And they all have their own feels and flavor to them.
Exactly. And the thing about like Midgar in the original FF7, and this is something that always, like, even when I was a kid, disappointed me, was that we never really got to explore Midgar. We only saw Sector 5 slums, Sector 6, I believe, and Sector 7, and that's it. And the Shinra Tower, and like the Maker reactors. But if Midgar was this huge, enormous place that you had like multiple missions to go on. Like, I imagine that the initial story with Avalon. Let's say you're going to make a 30-hour game. Like, maybe we're being ridiculously optimistic here in saying this. Maybe Square Enix will screw everyone in the long run. But let's dream for a second. Let's imagine that Midgar as a city is this open world, like Grand Theft Auto. Like, you've got these 8 individual slum cities and 8 individual upper place cities with the Maker reactors, and you go back to the Sector 7 base, and like Grand Theft Auto, you get missions you can go out on.
Right.
Like,
or like Crisis Core.
Like Crisis Core. And you get different missions. You get like Avalanche missions you go out on, and you've got like the story ones where you go and destroy the Maker reactors and stuff like that. Maybe you do 2 or 3 Maker reactors now instead of just like 3 or 4 Maker reactors of the original 2. But you do like, okay, so you've got to go fight these troops over in Sector 3. So you've got to make your way over to Sector 3, and you've got to sort of like, you can probably, I don't know, maybe you drive cars or something like that there. You've got to take the train there, whatever. There was Midgar is this enormous city that is supposed to be the size of, like, it's supposed to make New York look tiny, basically. It's supposed to be like, what if New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. all became one city? Right. Like, if you look at it on the world map, it is enormous.
That's and there's a lot of different. That's really the point. Look, I get that people are worried you're not going to get it scope and scale with a remake if it goes episodic, but that is a false assumption. But that's the point, is we don't know. For all you know, for all we know, by the time, maybe, I could see a possibility. I could see a scenario where Chapter 1 or Part 1 of FF7 Remake is $20. And then Chapter 2 is $40. And then Chapter 3 is $60. But Chapter 3 lets you access and return to everywhere you could go in the previous 2 chapters, provided it's still around. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And suddenly now you have this massive scope that dwarfs anything Square Enix has ever done before. And let me also put another scenario that, like you were saying earlier, which do you really want, people? Do you want Final Fantasy VII Remake released episodically, where you get maybe, because God only knows, you could do 3 chapters, you could do 7 chapters, you could do 20 chapters, but where you get a couple chapters or 1 chapter a year over several years, and you can start playing it in, let's say, 2017, maybe even 2016, okay?
Yeah.
Or do you want to wait until 2020, 2021 to play the game at all? I don't know about you, but I know I would pick episodic over that. And not to mention, part of why they might be doing this is just the financial realities, that the way that they can afford, the way they can justify the cost of what doing a Final Fantasy VII Remake would be, right, okay? The way they would have to justify that, the budget, is by breaking it into smaller, more digestible chunks. That's the reason, okay, Telltale Games started doing episodic releases at all, because it allowed them to budget things more so they could actually they couldn't afford to make an entire Sam and Max game, okay? So they had to do it in chunks, and that's why, they had to, because if you put the things together, they come out to a pretty much a standard length, full-on adventure game with the requisite number of sets and characters. An individual chapter is a vertical slice of gameplay, and you put it all together and you get the complete picture. It's like you've taken a photograph and you've cut it into 5 parts, and then you paste it all back together. That's an episodic release for Telltale, and we may get that from Square with Final Fantasy Remake. I fully expect it, but just on a much bigger scale.
There's a very good chance they may even just like offer you, hey, if you want to buy it, like, and this is, I think Telltale does this, and I think okay, this is kind of done with DLC, and I don't agree with this practice, Season Pass. You could probably buy the whole game up front, and then you never have to pay for it again. Like $60. It's like if you pay $60, you can get all the episodes as they come out. or even a month before they come out or something. But I don't know. But like, okay, let's stop calling people whitey bitches for a second, because people are being that. I am. But let's look at this. What would the chapters be, do you think, Sean? Let's look at this. Okay, so chapter 1, obviously Midgar. It's the Midgar section.
It's been so long since I actually played FF7. I'm not sure. I'll let you tell me what you think the chapter.
All right, you jump in with any points you got. All right, so let's look at this. Chapter 1 is Midgar. It's the story of Midgar. It is you're at home. You're at the Sector 7 base, and you've got sections of the story where you have to go out and do missions. Eventually, you've got the story missions where the plot missions where you go and destroy the reactors and stuff like that. And eventually, it builds up. And by the way, spoilers for FF7. If you've not played the game, just go play it already. It's a 15-year-old game, or 20-year-old game at this point, nearly. So yeah. Eventually, they destroy the Sector 7 base, and that hurdles you towards the end of Chapter 1. And you leave, and that's kind of the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is really becomes about opening up the world. So you've got like kind of, it goes into a bit more of a more open world style, as it were, like more traditional open world style.
I would say that traditional open world style is actually like a big giant city, if we're talking about that. But I think what you mean is maybe, whereas is an urban environment, I could see Chapter 2 focused more on making nature more of an enemy, making the world itself more of a character instead of just focusing on one city.
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
don't get big cities, instead you get the big environment. You probably go to the canyon and all that.
Yeah, like I imagine Chapter 1 kind of like taking you to Calm, doing the flashbacks and fight, and like doing the Midgar Zalom section. I can imagine the Midgar Zalom section, rather than being let's hire a Chocobo and ride across, although that's one of the main ways you can do it. One of the ways you could do it is like you've got to go through this like swamp that's actually a whole like world, and you've got to try and avoid that enormous snake and everything. I mean, can you imagine seeing that, like the way that snake stuck on a skewer? That was one of the most like awesome moments of the game for me. It was like absolutely terrifying for me when I was a kid. It's like, who is this Sephiroth fucking badass who ripped everyone at the Shinra Tower to shreds? We've just seen that flashback go completely nuts, and now we've seen him literally skewer a 20 foot, like more like 100-foot snake, like on a fucking pike. Like, it's like, imagine seeing all that and like in with the updated visuals. It's gonna be fantastic. But the chapter, like, that's really, yeah, like you said, it's more about nature, like being sort of like the taking this task.
Or exploring,
more about takes more of an exploration thing, like style to things. So you go out. So yeah, you still do your regular quest. You can go to Calm and collect quests. But all right, so Chapter 2 opens up a bit more. So instead of going back to the Avalanche base and getting your quests from there, your missions, as it were, you can go to Calm and get your missions. You can go to Junon and get your missions. You can go to the Chocobo Ranch and get your missions. You can go to the cave and get your mission, like even missions from there. Like you can go to Fort Condor and get your missions. Like you can get missions from all over the place. So it's a bit more explorative. Like you explore more. And I can imagine them adding like a couple of additional towns, because like, I mean, there are times in Crisis Core where there are towns mentioned that aren't even in the original FF7, like Modeaheim and Benora. Is it Benora or something? I can't remember the exact. I've not played Crisis Core yet, unfortunately, because I never owned a PSP. But I'm hoping we get a HD remake in time for this game.
Yes, if anything, if all, you know what, even if the FF7 remake ends up completely being terrible, the worst thing ever, the most awful video game ever, if it gets us an HD release on PS4 and Vita of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, then it will Ioannou. It will have been enough.
Yeah,
because that is one of the greatest games Square Enix has ever made. Period. It's one of my all-time favorite games. Period. Okay? And it is criminally underplayed. It is one of the big reasons I really fell back in love with Final Fantasy VII's world and characters. And it has one of the most emotional endings. The way it combines gameplay and storytelling for the final sequence is just heartbreaking. And people say prequels don't work, and you know that's not true. Prequels absolutely can work when they can tell their own story. You don't need to play Final Fantasy VII at all to appreciate Crisis Core. Crisis Core, it's largely forgotten about, and it's a shame because it also showed they could do a one-person system and they could make it work, and it is so good, and it deserves an HD re-release. It deserves
absolutely,
by a whole host of people like you who've never gotten to experience all of its majesty and its wonder and the story it tells. And
I'm
the
not
story's
going to lie.
convoluted.
I've heard so many great things because Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time. I'm not going to lie. I've literally thought every few months I look up on eBay, what's the price of a PSP 2000 now, so I can plug it into my TV.
It's worth it.
And I think it probably is. But then in my mind, I'm also like, oh, they're probably going to announce an HD remake the second I buy it, aren't they? So it's like I'm fighting myself almost at the same time. And that's the thing. You know what? They could. Here's the thing about episodic being able to expand the story. And this is what they've said they want to do with it. Now, I'm not going to lie. Let me just put this out there for a second. They could very much fuck this up. I'm not going to. They could very much just release the same game with HD graphics and like a changed battle system and everything, and just release the exact same story. But
or they could release a seriously cut down story that feels like a Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, exactly, which would piss me off so freaking much. But what they could release could be what they said they want to do with it is expand it. Now, right. I'm taking that at face value for right now because I'm an optimist, and you know I've gained a bit of trust back in Square Enix because of their recent releases. The fact that Kitase is acting as not just executive producer on this, but main producer on this again. And Nomura is directing it, who he was basically the complete designer of that game, really, like of the original one. And I think that this could be really interesting in terms of Chapter 2 probably will take us to maybe either the end of Junon after you fight Genova Life, or possibly even all the way to Nibelheim, basically. So you get a lot of story, like that'll be a lot of exploration, a lot of character exploration. You get a lot of this huge world in Chapter 2, basically. And they could expand out the story. So when you're doing the flashbacks, and eventually you get to the Zack flashbacks, they could actually expand out on that. Now knowing what they've got from Crisis Core, because I'm assuming they hadn't written Crisis Core before they wrote FF7. They could expand out on that. They could actually have you play through some of the sequences in Crisis Core. So get a lot more of the story from Crisis Core, and actually, hell, in a great scenario, Crisis Core could actually be part of the game as an episode. Could be one of the episodes.
I'm not sure that's going to be possible, but still, yeah. I will say this much: there are definitely loose ends from Crisis Core that it felt like they were setting up to re-explore down the line, and because everything with that Vincent game fell apart and all that, it didn't exactly. Because there's some minor follow-up in that to those loose ends, but it doesn't really.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. So as far as the world of FF7, since then we've had the compilation. We've had things like Crisis Core, like Dirge of Cerberus, like Advent Children, like Before Crisis, and we've had the novellas and everything. The world is so much more expansive than it was when FF7 was released. That they can include so much more now than they ever have in the past. They can explore so many more angles and have so many little references, and they can make FF7 this expansive universe rather than just a single game. And that's what the episodic thing could actually allow them to do, and allow it to get them out, get it out quicker. And if we're looking, if I just break it down very quickly, Chapter 1 is Midgar, Chapter 2 is everything up until Nibelheim, Chapter 3 is everything up until Ares dies, and then Chapter 4 is the majority of Disc 2 until Cloud falls into a coma. Chapter 5 is and then Chapter 5 is the final chapter, everything after Cloud's coma, basically, right up until the very final fight with Sephiroth.
What I will say is this. We know so little details on what they mean when they say episodic release, okay?
Yeah.
Because I could just as easily... People are picturing a Telltale situation where every month... I could just as easily see it where we get Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 on a disc, and it's a full disc game. And it's a full-length $60 game. And then a year and a half later, Part 2, year and a half later, Part 3. And, yes, it may mean you get something different than what you got in the original, but you know what? Good!
Yeah.
What the fuck? What the hell?
Oh my god! So many people okay. I'm just gonna say it's I like the Ocarina of Time remake on 3DS, but it's the same fucking game.
But at least, I could at least see the justification because it was on a platform, because it put it on platforms that were more easy for people to reach, and the graphical improvements did help it to some degree. Same with Majora's Mask, and neither game needed the kind of full-on process because they were already damn near perfect games.
But let's look at another remake quickly. Resident Evil remake. That is the best remake ever made, in my opinion, because it gave you the original game and everything that made the original game so great, but changed things. It changed things for the better. It improved things. And
yeah, it took what was a good but very dated game. Okay, you go back and play the original Resident Evil now, it's almost unplayable. The controls,
oh god, it's horrible.
The camera. I'm not even talking about the graphics. Okay, I'm just talking about things like the gameplay and the controls and the camera placement,
the voice acting.
I can live with. I mean, all that's fine. Some people even prefer that because they like the cheesy side. But as a game, just as a game, it is very hard to play now. And the remake, I mean, those tank controls did nobody any favors. I know there was some as survival horror has slowly changed and become something else, and as those controls were abandoned as we moved on to new generations, I know some people didn't like that, but to me it was like, no, those controls were terrible.
Yeah, I agree.
If the genre needed those controls to actually be scary, then it wasn't a good genre.
Well,
it hasn't, as you've seen, because actually these days, thanks to downloadables and all that, I think horror genre is more alive than it's ever been in video games.
Absolutely, yeah. I got the HD remaster of the remake actually recently for PC, and like they got rid of the tank controls for that, and honestly, I was worried for a minute without the tank controls it might not be the same game, but you know what, they kept the camera angles, they kept everything that made that game so cinematic and interesting at the time, and it's still a fantastic game. It's an amazing game, and that's what I want to see from FF7 is enough changes that it is not playing the same game with just better graphics, that we are that it feels like I'm experiencing. Like, here's the thing: whenever somebody says to me, I'm going to play Final Fantasy VII for the first time, do you know what I say to them? I'm so fucking jealous of you right now. Because you're getting to experience like something I wish I could experience again for the first time. And now I think I'm going to get that chance. I think I'm going to get that chance to really experience Final Fantasy VII for the first time again.
And let me just say that. Yep. And let me just say that Final Fantasy VII's been now released on pretty much every platform imaginable. If you want to play the original, you can go do that. Okay. It's out there, it's easy to play, and it's still, playable if, as long as you're willing to put up with the bullshit that was just, the Titus of a different era, okay? Not even talking about its quality. I mean, when I go back and play Final Fantasy VI again, or even when I love Chrono Trigger, but I won't lie that there are times when I'm replaying Chrono Trigger that I kind of wish, that I'm so glad for New Game Plus, because it means I don't have to put up, because I've beaten that game so many times, if I want experience, I can cut through a lot of the bullshit because I'm so overpowered.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I don't have 40. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me finish.
Sorry.
And you want to play the original? You are free to play the original, but you don't. If all you want is a game with slightly better graphics, then what is the point?
Then there are mods. There are mods out there for the PC that do that.
And more importantly, you don't seem to understand. Even just something that simple, okay, would be an incredibly expensive undertaking. It wouldn't be simple at all. Do you not understand what it means to change models? What it means? I mean, there's a lot of people out there who have unrealistic, and this is a larger problem in general, and we see it a lot of times in Kickstarters and all that. There are a lot of people who do not understand, hey, I don't care what they fucking said in the Kickstarter. Shamoon 3 is not being made off the money they made from the Kickstarter. It's being made off money being backed to them by Sony and a bunch of other places, because they raised a lot of money, but they didn't raise shit compared to what a game like that actually needs to be made. Okay, I mean, for the love of God, we're in the middle of this isn't a game, but okay, we're in the final hours as we record this of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 Returns thing. They need like 5.5 million. They need 5.5 million to be able to make 12 new episodes of that show. And they're going to still stay mostly practical effects, but, I mean, that's still a lot of money for a show that doesn't necessarily look it, because these cost a lot more money than you think. People don't get just how much it really does cost to make this stuff. And so if Square, and I totally get Square going, what's the point of doing this if we're just going to slightly improve the graphics? That's dumb. That's not worth the money. And you know what? It won't make money. Because maybe a couple hundred people who really want it, the diehards, will buy it, but the majority of the audience won't, because they'll see it as a pointless waste of time.
Yeah.
No, you go to do a remake of Final Fantasy VII, you do a remake of Final Fantasy VII.
No one wants the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, They want to see something new.
like, for instance, what I want to see in the remake more than anything? I was always disappointed. I think one of the biggest balls the series dropped, and especially in this day and age, is our heroes at the beginning of the game are terrorists. They're actual full-on terrorists.
Yeah.
They're bombing things. They're destroying things. They're killing innocent people. Now, you could say, but they're doing it to save the planet. Well, I'm sure that lots of eco-terrorists in the real world have said that before killing many people or ruining lives. Lots of terrorists will give you self-justification for what they're doing. And I thought, and look, I'm not saying you make Shinra the good guy, okay? But I'd like to look at the recent Jessica Jones TV series I reviewed. The main bad guy in there, Kilgrave, is a bad guy. You never really feel sorry for him, but at the same time, the show goes out of its way to present him as a complicated figure who is a believable human being. A monstrous human being, but a real human being. And that's the thing. And so I'm hoping we can see more in the remake, that we actually explore the fact that these guys are going around doing something arguably terrible, especially if it was happening in our own world. So
yeah, I mean, when you look at our own world and what has happened since FF7, since FF7 was released, 9/11 has happened, and the world has become so much more aware of terrorism than they ever have been in the past. And I think that is something that could be explored. Honestly, I'm not saying, hey, we should give sympathy to terrorists through this game or anything. That's definitely not what I'm saying, but we should definitely look at kind of like why they're doing it. Like, I never agree with the IRA as an example. I'm from England, so the IRA was Irish terrorists that attacked the UK for about 60 years.
I mean, I'm very aware as an American that the origins of my country lie in acts from people that would today be branded as terrorism.
Exactly, yeah. The IRA were considered terrorists, but do I understand their motives? Yeah, I kind of do.
The reality is that the world is complex, and I'm hoping with a good translation and a more focused story. I don't know what we're going to get with this remake. What I know is that was a damn impressive trailer. Let's wrap things up by just talking about the trailer. And one last question: what'd you think of the trailer itself?
I thought the trailer was fantastic. I thought I was absolutely shocked, like really shocked that they released it this early. Honestly, like when a couple of people tweeted about it, I thought, oh, this is going to be a troll, isn't it? This is blatantly going to be a troll. And like my brother and I, who we're together maybe 5 days out of the year these days because he lives in London. Like we maybe are together for sort of like a very brief amount, and we both got into Final Fantasy VII at the exact same time. We both played it together the first time. The trailer came out. We were together in LA, and we literally stopped it on the computer, put it on the big screen, and watched it. And I think it looked fantastic. I think visually the game looks as good, if not better, than 15. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's really hard to tell where the cutscenes end and where the gameplay begins at times, as in like the not the non-pre-rendered stuff.
It looks amazing. I agree with you that there was a very impressive trailer. I was not expecting it to be that far along, and then you throw in the English voice acting. So let me ask you, Petros, when do you now think we might see the release of the first part of this FF7 remake?
All right, I know they're all right. So theoretically,
they can't release it before 15.
Theoretically, yeah, exactly what I was about to say. Theoretically, we will get this after 15 because they've said multiple times they want to release 15 first. 15 is probably further along in the project. I think we will get 15 towards the end of 2016, and we will get FF7 at the end of 2017 or in the middle of 2017, basically in time for the 20-year anniversary of FF7, which actually about 10 years ago or so, they said they would continue the compilation until its 20th anniversary. Now, interestingly enough, that was around about the time that they did the first pre-rendered trailer and everything, and the real demand for the remake began. So I think we'll see it at the end of 2017, before the end of 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I could also see a scenario. I think it's unlikely. Okay. But I could see a scenario where they surprise us all and they announce, I don't know, FF7's coming out in the summer. I mean, FF15's coming out in the summer, okay? Like, they announce at E3. I think this is a very unlikely scenario, but I'm just giving you this. I could see a scenario where they announce it's going to be released, like a week after E3, and then they announce, and part 1 of FF7 Remake this December. Unlikely, but I find it very fascinating and very interesting that there was English voice acting in that.
Yeah, you very rarely get English voice acting for this
and the lip matched. I mean, they've cast the voice actors. I mean, I guess the voice actors could change. I mean, that feels like a conscious decision on their part, and it had to have been, and that's an interesting one. I mean, it really does raise a lot of issues. So I'm more excited than ever. And
I'm interested to see how the gameplay really does play at the end of the day. Like FF7's, like it's a drastic departure from FF7, but they've said, like, and they said in interviews recently, they're not trying to make it FF15's gameplay at all. Although it looks very similar, they're trying to make a cross between FF15's action gameplay and the more tactical 7 gameplay.
I wonder, for instance, if we'll still get distinct battlefields. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, will you still get the zoom in and then fights take place on a separate map?
Interesting.
Because I could see that. If you look at that trailer, I could kind of see maybe that. I don't know. I guess we will see. Regardless, people, just calm the fuck down, please. Please, please. There's no... we know... Look, I don't know if it's going to be good. I don't know if it's going to be bad. I don't know if the release is going to be a ripoff or not, although there's nothing particularly in Square Enix's history that leads me to believe they're going to release, I don't know, a Ground Zeroes, which was like a $40 game, which had like literally a half hour of actual content plus replaying a bunch of times. I mean, they could do that, but I would be very surprised if they did, just because look at their general track record. These are guys, their problem is usually not being under-ambitious, it's being too ambitious. Their problem is reining it in, not lacking in stuff to fill stuff with. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, their real problem is, how do we have enough material? How do we cut back on material so we don't produce a 500-hour game? That's their problem. You look at the track record of these guys, that's the more realistic issue. So
yeah.
I
don't think here's the thing, like even though let me put it this way, even though I hate FF13 and its linear bullshit and everything, it's not like we got a small game with that thing.
Right, and you did eventually get a big open world area that is still one of my favorite areas in a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, you still that game has still got a lot of content in it. Even if I'm not particularly happy with that, right, with the quality of that content, you never worry about a Final Fantasy game having a lack of content.
Right, I mean, you don't have to like the content, okay, but you cannot sit there and say that Final Fantasy 13 looked like a cheap game. If Final Fantasy 13 was a game, you could say, well, they don't have the ability to make a good game anymore, fine, but they certainly have the ability to make a game. And beyond that, the rest is all subjective as fucking hell.
And truth is, I never liked Final Fantasy 13 and its universe too much, but looking at it and the games that followed it, I didn't play Lightning Returns, but 13.2 was considerably better than 13 in my opinion. It was a much, much better game. It was more open, and they learned. And here's the thing: there was such a backlash to 13, and people keep going on about it. And you know what? Even though I hate 13, shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up already.
Yeah, it's time to move on. Really, it's the same way. It's the same way I feel when I hear somebody now rage about the prequels.
Yeah, it's like just like when people are comparing like the new Star Wars movies to the prequels, and I may be eating my own words in a few weeks, but in a few days actually. But
why are you still so angry?
Yeah, just give it a rest. Stop being a giant whiny man child or girl child. But
I mean, at the end of the day, the Beatles are just a rock band. And by which
get off your own chat.
But by the end of the day, they're important. These games, these movies, all these things. Yes, they're important. And I'm not saying don't be a geek. The name of the goddamn channel is Unrepented Geeking. But there is still a time and a place, and there is such a thing as taking a step back, and there is such a thing as if you're still boiling with rage years after something has been released, you got problems. I'm sorry, you just do. I'm not saying you have to like it. Like, I'll never like what DC Comics has been doing with their comic line. That's never going to change, but I don't get angry about it anymore.
At this point,
life's too short for that.
Maybe it's me between the ages of sort of like 18 and to now where I am at 27. But something about me now is just like, with Final Fantasy and with DC, it's just like, all right, I don't like this anymore. I'm not gonna buy it, and that's just it. If you don't like the FF7 remake, don't fucking buy it.
I think there's a very good chance, by the way, based on previous history, they're going to release a demo of it.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to be able to get to try it out before you play it, before you have to buy it. I mean, I don't know. Look, at the end of the day, it's just a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Don't stress out. And this isn't, look, if this was Konami announcing an episodic release, was announcing we're remaking Suikoden 3 with an episodic release, yeah, I'd be fucking terrified. Because Konami at this point has shown that they really are just the worst, okay? And I will add to the cry of fuck you, Konami. Fuck you.
Yeah.
this isn't Konami. This is Square Enix, and in general, they've shown, they've made mistakes, but they've also shown a willingness to correct mistakes and to learn from them. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. I'm about out of gas. I know you're feeling the same way. I want to thank Petros for joining me on the show, and I want to thank all of you for watching. Please, please, please spread the word. Rate and review on iTunes, review it on YouTube, tell people on Twitter, Facebook, whatever obscure, strange social media site you're using now. I can't keep up with you damn kids. Get off my lawn. Spread the word, and also head on over to unrepentantgeeking.com for more stuff from me, and head over to patreon.com/unrepentantgeeking if you'd like to support the show. Petros, remind them where they can see more stuff from you one last time.
Well, you can go to youtube.com/LeonUnity. Or mylifeasavideogame.com. You can go to youtube.com/LeonUnity or mylifeasavideogame.com to watch my show. Or you can catch me every Monday. I do live streams of Super Mario Maker, where I play your levels live. If you follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, everything is Petros of Sparta. Then you can catch my thing. I do live streams of Twitch on every Monday of Mario Maker, and I'm going to be doing some new shows going into 2016. So, tune in.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for joining me. I'm Shaun Carterfeld for Channel Awesome and Unrepentant Geeking, wishing you all happy gaming.